Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
Welcome, everyone, to the Stoa. Today, it's the launch of a quarterly series called Monastic Conversations. So essentially, every quarter, someone from the Monastic Academy visits the Stoa and shares some wisdom, kind of maybe gives an update or just jams about whatever is alive for that person. And as you know, we've been having a lot of people from the Monastic Academy come, and a lot of Buddhists as well, for whatever reason. Some way more Buddhists at the Stoa than actual Stoics, and it feels very right that is the case. So today we have Peter Park with us. Peter is an executive director and teacher at the Monastic Academy. He's one of the senior people there. He's been there for a while. So I'm going to tag in Peter in a moment, and I think he has something prepared for us to talk, share a little bit about himself and what's going on at the Monastic Academy. And I think he might have some guided meditation. So if there's any questions, just throw them in the chat like usual. I'll call you, unmute yourself, and you can ask a question to Peter, unless Peter prefers a different approach. So that being said, I will tag Peter in. Welcome to the Stoa, my friend. Here, mute. There you go.
Cool. So thanks a lot, Peter. This is really great. I've been a fan of Stella from afar, so it's really nice to be presenting today. As Peter mentioned, my name is Peter Park. I'm the executive director and one of the teachers at our headquarters branch in Vermont, the Monastic Academy for the Preservation of Life on Earth, which I thought I'd just explain a little bit about my background and what we're doing here at Maple, and then do another practice. And then really, mostly I'm interested in all of y'all and what brought you here today and what's arising for you. So personally, I can say that I've been here for about 5.5 years, and I didn't come here planning on staying this long. I initially signed a 6-month agreement and thought I'd be gone, get enlightened, and leave after 6 months. And turns out the path is much more richer than I can cover in 6 months' time. So here we're sort of a modern monastery, taking the best of contemplative traditional practice and standards, ethical behavior, and code of conduct, and merging it with, say, nonprofit work in the world and sort of a startup-y culture of how to expand and really deal with the existential risks and challenges of this sort of 21st century, and cultivating awakened leaders who can both have really deep spiritual insight and also have the capability and the power to affect global change in whatever shape or form that looks like. And so it's been a real privilege in my years that when I first joined, there were about 10 of us in a rented house in Johnson, Vermont. And now we have 3 centers, one outside of Toronto and one in the Bay Area. And we have a large property in Vermont that we got a few years ago. And we were sort of like a startup aspiring to grow exponentially, to provide this training for anyone that is seeking it out. And I always say that if you want to train, say, the best soldier or warrior, then there's clearly like Army Rangers or Navy SEALs, or if you want the best doctors, or if you want Harvard Business School for like business people, or astronaut training for that kind of thing. But where do you go if you want to create and develop and train with the wisest, most compassionate, most service-oriented people in the world? How do you get that kind of training? And why don't we as a civilization value that kind of training to create those kinds of people when there's billions and trillions of dollars being directed to make more startups, to make more business school graduates, MBAs, to make more soldiers. If you want the professional sports, you can train people to the highest level of peak physical performance. But what about training people in the peak virtuous conduct and leadership to make people that you can trust? That I think a huge thing that's happening in our times, especially my generation growing up, is this loss of trust in pretty much everything, whether it's government or religion or business. And this place is made to make trustworthy leaders, make trustworthy humans. And we do that by living in community, doing contemplative practices, and taking on real world tasks and projects. And so here we talk about the integration of wisdom, love, and power, or awakening and responsibility. And so our specialization here is really, how do you make people that can both spend hundreds, thousands of hours in deep meditation, and also be charged with make a brand new community in California and fundraise millions of dollars so you can create a new center. How do you develop people that can really do that? And I think there's a lot of hunger in the world for that, and I think it's really desperately needed in these times. So I've been very grateful and appreciative. I've stuck around all these years because out of compassion, seeing that need and seeing the growing need and growing awareness in the world that whatever training, whether it's Buddhist or Stoicism or mystical Christianity or something else, there's a real deep need to go inside to develop ourselves and also take that insight into the world, do good. And the best way to do that, I would say, is doing that in a community of people that can hold each other to the highest standards and believe in something beyond just ourselves. And that's why I'm here. And what I'm hoping to change in the future is change the global culture such that we value life as its own value, that we value things like virtue, ethics, contemplative training, and that becomes a common practice that people value, just like it's just taken for granted now that we expect young people to go to college. We sort of just take it for granted that certain things are just good, that my generation, for me, was you should make passive income and get as much freedom as possible so you can do whatever you want. And it turns out for a lot of us who come to this training, we realize, oh, actually living in community and being of service is actually deeply fulfilling and what I'm really called to do. And it'll be wonderful to give that opportunity to as many people as possible. So a little bit about me. I'm also going into a solitary cabin retreat in March, so I'm really looking forward to disconnecting for about 2 months. And I'm mainly right now working on setting up the proper conditions and circumstances so that I can get away and the monastic center here continues growing. And in this next year, we'll be actually launching our own sort of small cohort groups, given COVID and everything. So we'll be inviting people to join our online program, probably like 10 to 20 people at a time, to go through the ecology of practices we do at Maple, from circling and meditation and coaching to emotional processing work. We're going to be launching that in January. We did a beta test a few months ago. And we're also looking to continue to expand and start, community houses of a few monastics going out into the different communities to maximize benefit and creating good community in different areas of the country, and ultimately create more and more leaders who can lead communities and help guide future direction of civilization. So a little bit about me. Hopefully there's a lot of questions that we can go into more detail going forward. But I thought we would just take maybe like 3 or 4 minutes to do a little bit of practice. and opening up for group dialogue. So I don't have any of my normal accoutrements, but I'll just sort of guide my voice. Everyone wants to start off just getting a good posture, finding a comfortable seat where we can feel our bodies, relaxing our bodies, allowing ourselves to settle into our chairs, feeling the earth, meeting our bodies, taking our weight, seeing if we can just take one mindful breath, noticing the inhale, noticing the exhale, giving ourselves permission to let go and return to the simplicity of just this one breath, this one body. Appreciating our minds for any planning or thinking it might be doing, but gently letting it know that right now it's not needed, and being grateful to be in a community that's willing to practice and wanting to just come back to a simple present moment, feeling our bodies, feeling our breath, sinking into this experience. Seeing if we can take on an attitude of openness and curiosity, fully meeting each moment, letting go of right or wrong, good or bad, and just being curious, what's this like? What's this like? Letting go of any fixation, letting go of what's happening, being more curious about how I can pay attention right now so that I can cultivate curiosity and openness. How can I be of this experience even more? All right, and you can start wiggling your toes and fingers and gently bring yourself back to this experience of being together. Thanks y'all for practicing together and sharing a moment of silence. Thought we could maybe open it up. You be personally curious what brought you here, since I don't think any of you know me except for the one or two faces I recognize. And if you have any general questions about Monastic Academy or me, what I said, happy to field that as well.
So start putting your questions in the chat, and I'll call you. You're going to mute yourself. If you don't want to be on YouTube, just indicate that and I'll read your question on your behalf. And while the questions come, I'll warm you up with a question myself, Peter.
Cool.
So I'm curious, it seems like there's a specific Buddhistic lineage that the Monastic Academy belongs to, and you have, like, the cool outfits, and I think there's an optionality to change your name if you reach a certain point of experience. And then there's just sort of like this meta-modern quality, if you will, where you have this ecology of practices about like circling, emotional processing, coaching, and then how you said in the beginning, like how it's the front-facing, like marketing, if you will. It's about awakening leaders. Like there's terms that would attract people that are not necessarily would be attracted to Buddhism for its own sake. So I'm curious about the relationship between those two things.
Right. Yeah, this is an ongoing evolutionary question that we often ask internally here. My experience, when you said that, I was reminded of one of my early, when I was in college, I had a religious studies professor who said the Buddha was not a Buddhist and Christ was not a Christian. And so if you think about what was the original purpose of these mystical traditions, like what was Christ really teaching, what was Buddha really teaching, it wasn't just to make more followers or more Christians and more Buddhists. That's, at least in my perception, in the way that I look at things, that is a particular form of training, that's a particular culture, a particular system that ideally is pointing people to get to the underlying realization or principle that we're really aiming for, not just to make people believe certain things or dress in certain ways or say certain things, but more to really realize and connect to that deep source of wisdom and love. It turns out that the founder of our Nido lineage tradition, Soryu Foro, trained primarily in Rinzai Zen along with other forms of Buddhism, but he also has a background in Native American ceremonies and grew up as a Quaker. Likewise, I grew up Roman Catholic and actually originally did a lot of Taoist Tai Chi and translated Tao Te Ching for like every day for 2 years and had much of a stronger Taoist background initially before going more into Buddhism. So it just turns out, at least in modern times, that a lot of Asian religions really highly cultivated contemplative practice as a science that to a large degree I think was lost or not as developed or not as popular in the West. And so just because we have that, we use it, but we also have, for example, a teacher, Darren Silver, who comes out from Colorado and leads an annual vision quest on our land, where we get to build a sweat lodge and do a quest in our woods. And we've brought other teachers to do embodiment, do emotional processing or circling. So it turns out Buddhism, I would say, maybe has, if not the most, then arguably one of the most developed paths to awakening and complete training, and is very explicit that the Buddha was just a human being and that this is something that you can definitely do and you have to do. Just believing it's not good enough. Just kind of radical for any religion or any philosophy to say, don't just believe me on my word, but actually realize it yourself. So I think ultimately we would aspire, if there was a suitable teacher to even have, say, a Native American center, to have a mystical Christian tradition center, but just because of conditions and circumstances, it turns out we're mostly Buddhist, but we also draw from other traditions, and even saying Buddhist is kind of weird because what Japanese Buddhism looks like compared to Thailand versus, you know, Burma looks really different. And in America, it's a little strange because we have American Buddhism, which really, I don't really know what American Buddhism is, but it's weird. So, yeah, it's a continuing evolutionary thing. It's very modern, meta-modern, as you said, in that you sort of can transcend and see beyond just the trappings of form, but we're also completely sincere in that there was a real precious baby that these traditions have been carrying for thousands of years. And so how to not throw out the baby with the bathwater is a real challenge. But you can't just pick and choose and say, like, you know, I'm gonna somehow make Buddhism better than these other traditions that have been around for thousands of years. And yet, how do you make a practice that fits 21st century modern global challenges and modern minds? It's a big challenge that we're trying to confront. And part of the reason why we have these other practices here, so that we can create a form of contemplative practice that really works for the modern mind and addresses all kinds of people here.
All right. So there's a lot of great questions coming in. We're not going to get to all the questions, and I'm not going to ask them in order, but I'll read Kim's question first, and that's a good launching point. Can you share more about the ecology of practices and how these inform decision-making within the community and outside of it?
Right. So over the years, different people have brought different practices. So I originally brought circling interpersonal meditation practice here about 5 years ago. And then other people have brought embodiment, or Daniel Thorson brought peer coaching. And a few teachers have come and sort of taught us bioemotive emotional processing. So really this past year, we formulated that into orientation week, and we train all the new people through our ecology of practices. So the foundation is meditation. So we draw heavily from Shinzen Young, who's a modern American meditation master, and use his system as a basic language and framework for how we do meditation. On top of that, we do weekly circling practice and have semi-regular circling retreats. We're having one at the end of the year, actually, over New Year's. So we learn how to bring that mindfulness into connection with each other and relate to each other through our normal relational blind spots and patterning. We do emotional processing practices to learn how to work with our triggers and work with activation. We do peer-to-peer coaching to learn how to change our habits and patterns on a more day-to-day level. And probably the biggest thing actually though of a monastery or a monastic group is living in community. And that one of the reasons I joined was I started a Dharma house in Boston with the intention to live well and do good things and everything. But it turns out that when push comes to shove, for a lot of people, it was, at least in my group, it was, do I really want to feel uncomfortable going into giving this person feedback about the dirty dishes the 12th time, or just let it go and slowly let the community be created over time? And so in a monastic setting where everyone's like committed, that the top level thing is wanting each other to develop spiritually, emotionally, personally, we constantly give each other feedback and hold each other to the highest standards, such that I might not want to wake up at 4:30 in the morning to meditate, but everyone's going to be waiting for me if I'm not there. So it's easy to go from I only meditate maybe once a week to coming here, and now I'm meditating 3 hours a day because that's the norm and that's the communal experience. And so a huge part of the practice here is learning how to live in community, how to both follow and lead. I feel like there's a second half to that question that I'm missing. But, oh, how informed decision making?
Let me check. Yeah, how does this inform the decision making within and outside of the community?
Well, it's helpful in so much as a person's decision making, you could say, is most optimal when they're most, for those of you who like talk to Jordan Hall and stuff, like have sovereignty. So to the degree that people are have presence and are whole and integrated with themselves, the better decisions they'll make. And then to the degree that you can have that in a group of people, so like a circling practice will help us connect with each other and tap into each other and sense where people are and not take things so personally. It helps us make collective decisions more optimally. And because each of us tend to have sort of certain places we're blocked habitually, things like emotional processing can help us really focus and hone in on certain areas where maybe I get triggered each time someone makes a demand on my time or says that I habitually think people are saying I'm a bad leader because they offer criticism about something I did or something. I can learn how to work with that as a thing that I'm carrying isn't about what the other person is doing. So all these practices help us become more sovereign, become more integrated so that those don't block us, as well as when we're together in a group and learning how to sense into each other and know when it's appropriate to, okay, I think we can stop. This is no longer a logical conversation. There's some emotion here that we need to address. Or I'm noticing I'm taking this really personally and I don't think I have good sovereignty right now to engage in this question. Can we talk about this later after I calm down or something? That turns out to be really useful and helpful.
Cool. So I think I'll take in Victor and then Aileen after, because Victor has something, a question related to goals. Victor, if you can unmute yourself.
Hey, much appreciated. And good to see you again there, Peter. So my question, was related to goals. In particular, I'm interested to know, what is how does Maple leadership go about, setting goals for what we want to accomplish as a community in the world and such?
Yeah, that's a good way to ask. Well, so our top level goal, the goal of the institution as a whole, that would probably never change, is addressing the problem of human greed. That we want to eradicate human greed, which might look a lot of forms. It might mean creating better laws. It might mean creating new technology. It might mean changing cultural norms. And it might mean that few people get enlightened. Doesn't necessarily mean everyone becomes enlightened or something, but the top level goal is always working to end human greed. That human greed, human hatred, human mind that's filled with its ignorance and issues is causing global warming, is causing the invention of nuclear weapons, is the cause of a lot of the challenges and problems in the world today, is the human mind with its screwed up psychology. To that end, though, we also have, say, a mortgage, hundreds of thousands of dollars. We have people here we need to feed. We want to grow more centers. And so a lot of the goals happen both on a micro and macro level. So on a very large scale level, Soryu, who again is the founder and the head teacher, in communication with a lot of partners and the board and everything. To a large degree, it's sort of the world tells us what opportunities and what possibilities are being asked of us to do. And in response to that, we formulate our goals. So a lot of it's Soryu, in talking to certain senior leadership here, will formulate goals each year. And also on a micro level, this is also a leadership development center. So all of the residents, especially the longer they're here, get more and more leadership and more power, and more and more set their own goals in their own sphere of responsibility, all in service to this larger goal of creating a good training center that will impact the world and human group. So on a very high level, it's sort of Soryu talking with a few of the leaders of each center, and in connection with what's happening in the world. And then on a micro, month-to-month, week-to-week level, everyone, all the residents training at each center is empowered to do all kinds of stuff. So happens at both levels there.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. So how does the team or the community sense into like being in the right relationship with how to action those goals?
Well, again, a lot of it's just feedback from reality. I mean, we'll try something out, and then maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. I mean, this week I'm having the entire group practice giving Dharma talks. I told everyone yesterday, at the end of the week, everyone here has to give a Dharma talk to the group. You all have to practice learning how to be strong leaders and teachers. And so I'll find out by the end of the week what parts of this was good and what parts of this didn't work. And maybe this was a terrible idea. But a lot of it's just trial and error, honestly. We try to iterate as fast as possible.
Cool. So I'm going to tag in Ryan in a moment, but I thought I'd ask a question, then tag him in and ask, and he can ask a question which is going to be similar to mine. So I originally wanted to ask you about power dynamics. Our friend Toshin here, he does Berja mapping, and he came to the Stoa and talked about how kind of power relates in certain communities. And I imagine that's one of the things people wonder about going into Monastic Academy, because anything that kind of falls outside of the norm of reality, people just say cult right away.
Yeah, right.
And I'm friends with most of the people in Monastic Academy, and I won't name who it is, but someone when they were coming in, like, is this place a cult? And then eventually became a member. And so, yeah, so that's kind of that tension, like, what's going on there? Because we know a lot of other communities, there was abuses in some other Buddhistic type communities. So with that framing, I'll tag in Ryan, because he has a similar question with a different angle.
Yeah, that's like basically a very similar question that I've got. I'm really excited about what you guys are doing at the Monastic Academy. So thanks for coming on the Stoa. And I'll just read my question. So yeah, as we have seen many times, over-spiritualized institutions can exhibit a shadow side, becoming breeding grounds for controversy, exploitation, and a variety of other negative expressions. How do you at Maple maintain a healthy, non-exploitative power ecology within the inherent hierarchy of a monastic setting? And what are your systems of checks and balances that protect you internally as an institution, externally as you're publicly represented in the world and media, and also what protects the individuals at various stages of training from novice all the way up to master, or I don't know, head teacher, however you designate that position. So yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. And it's true, what we're doing, we don't actually call ourselves a monastery, but that is the closest mental model of what we're doing. And so I find it one of the hardest challenges of being here is being able to communicate what exactly we are to people, because Is it a nonprofit? Is it a monastery? Is it a cult? Is it a leadership development center? All of these things. And one way to say is that we're all in a cult. The most distinguishing factor of a cult is you don't realize you're in a cult. And so, you know, capitalist, humanist, modern society is a cult in and of itself. And so the question I would ask first is, does the group acknowledge that it probably has shadows and has, you know, is doing something? And so here, and what the beauty of, you know, a traditional Buddhist community or teaching is that it begins with the idea that this is all just made up. And I think one of the virtues of this place being meta-modern, that we don't have hundreds or thousands of years of lineage, is that everyone coming here can see right off the bat, this is all just made up. Like, I brought Circling here 5 years ago. This nonprofit's only been incorporated for less than 10 years. And so it's pretty obvious coming in that, oh, this is not like, the downfall. I've studied a lot of cult stuff, and before Osho became famous with his Netflix series, I like read all about that like 10 years ago. And the distinguishing factor to me in a lot of these cults was that it came from some like mystical Asian place, and the leader must be infallible like the Pope, and everyone lost their own responsibility of critical thinking because they just assumed that this enlightened leadership person or people were always right. Whereas pretty much everyone who comes to a place like this that would choose to come to Maple versus any other traditional monastery already comes in with sort of this meta-modern perspective and concern. And so it's really easy straight off the bat to just go. I mean, honestly, most of the people who come here are wondering, is this a cult? And like struggle with hierarchy and discipline. And that's kind of normal because in modern times, we've jumped to postmodernism and just kind of skipped any training in hierarchy or power or anything. So I would say one thing that's really helpful is just the fact that we're so young, that we're not tied to some traditional lineage, so that people can say like, oh, well, that's like Zen, or that's, you know, whatever. It's just, there's just a bunch of people that have been around for 10 years or less. It's really hard to build up a lot of delusions when you just, you're like, yeah, there's just a guy. Furthermore, the Buddha talked about this, of how do you trust a teacher? And he said that you should observe a teacher in a lot of different circumstances over a long period of time. And so one of the things I really admire about Soryu is that he actually lives on the grounds, he eats meals with us, you know, he does work, and we get to see him in a lot of different contexts, doing a lot of different things over a long period of time, which is actually pretty rare that you find any place where the teacher lives and works alongside the students in a lot of different contexts is actually pretty rare to find. And so you can't just hide behind some veneer of the guy that gives a talk and then has his own private life most of the time. You get to see the teachers, you get to see each other. And this is why I said the community is so important. You get to see each other and you can just judge, like, oh, he didn't get upset in that situation where I thought he'd get upset, or, you know, just for me, he just consistently turned out, and the people here consistently turn out to be trustworthy. And if we're not trustworthy, none of us want to be here if it's not trustworthy, so we give each other feedback. And so there's an incentive to continually develop in that way. And the other distinguishing feature of a cult is that they don't want you to communicate with anyone else or leave. Whereas here we celebrate everyone who comes. We have a welcoming ceremony for new residents, but we also have a goodbye ceremony whenever a resident leaves, and it's a celebration, and we praise them about how good they are and all the good work they're going to do in the world. And unlike maybe a traditional monastery, we don't try to stay cloistered from the world. Well, pre-COVID times, we would go to the local city and give talks and stay in connection with family and friends, and still aspire to actually send residents here increasingly out into the world to do good work and create more connections. And so we don't have like a ideology or three things to believe or something that we're trying to indoctrinate everyone about. We're really trying to make empowered, realized, dedicated, service-oriented people. So we don't have like a I don't know if we have like a weekly check-in thing that we do, like, okay, what abuse has happened this week, and are we becoming more cultish or something? But I think just the fact that we continually have people coming in, people going out, it creates a virtuous cycle, and it's a huge concern in everyone's mind, because I think my generation just grew up with all the stories about all the abusive teachers in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, now the 2000s. And so we're all looking out for that and looking at each other to make sure that's not happening. Almost sometimes to the point where we're maybe holding back our power and impact because the fear of possibly doing the wrong thing, at least for me, I know can inhibit me from taking action as well. So there's sometimes the polar opposite issue with that. I don't know, it's complicated and complex concern. Main thing I'd say is it's definitely something that's on a lot of our minds a lot of the time.
Cool. Any quick follow-up, Ryan?
Yeah, real quick. So I'm hearing you're saying that basically the community and the transparency within the community is the system of checks and balances, or is how you hold yourself accountable, and that also there's this permeable membrane between inside the community and the outer world, and that it's that fluidity that kind of gives you the I don't know, keeps you accountable also. So in terms of size of community, it seems like that size would have to be, everybody would have to know each other, like get into the Dunbar type ID. Mm-hmm. So are you looking to scale in terms of just proto-B in the way that Jim Rutt talks about it, communities of 150 people or less, multiple around the world? Or how do you go about scaling? So maybe that wasn't a quick follow-up shit, but.
I can answer really quickly, which is it's complex. On one level, we want hundreds of centers, ideally, over time that would be relatively small, 20 to 150 people. Here at Vermont, we're trying to make a village where lay people can build houses and run businesses and stuff. But ideally, that our entire Vermont community, residential community, wouldn't be larger than, say, 150 to 100 people at most. And so having many centers, but we're also trying to build more vertically, such as online programming and creating community houses. And I can see a lot of different ways that we can scale in a lot of different directions. But in terms of the monastic training, yeah, small centers with a few dozen people at each center is the idea.
All right. I will be reading this question on Aline's behalf. What happens after someone reaches awakening at Maple? How is that treated? Has anyone gotten to that stage?
Well, they probably cook oatmeal and chant the next day. So they continue on. As far as I know, Soryu's definition of awakening, I would say, is much higher standard than what most modern people might think awakening is. And given that we have certain gradations of what qualifies certain people, for example, to teach. But as far as I'm aware, I don't think anyone's qualified to say awakened. But as Sori recently said in a retreat talk, awakening is a path, not a destination. So, short answer would be they probably go to sleep and put their pants on one leg at a time. Hopefully start a new center where they can train other people.
All right. For a practical question, I'll take in Nathan. Nathan, if you can ask your question.
Yeah, I was just wondering about this, these online cohorts that you talked about launching in January. Like, what maybe you could say a little bit more about what that's like and where you might find out like how to sign up for that or check it out.
Yeah, probably easiest thing would be using our website to send us an email or sign up for a newsletter. Basically, last year, what we did, we started hosting these week-long in-person programs where we taught everyone basically our version of the Buddhist Eightfold Path, which included, say, interpersonal meditation, circling, and emotional processing, and coaching. And at the end of the week, the group would each figure out, to the extent they could at that moment, their vow in their life and the next committed step they're going to make as a public accountability to make strides in that direction. And really proud that I think we've always had like 95% plus fulfillment of their commitments. And so we took that in-person format and then we made it an online program that we beta tested the last few months with a small cohort of about 10 people online, where each week they have certain readings and video, but they also meet live in person, get facilitation and talk with their cohort. And then, so 1 week might be meditation, 1 week might be circling, 1 week might be emotional processing, 1 week might be self-led retreat, and another week might be coaching, figuring out your commitment or your next vow. And you do this all within the cohort facilitated by Maple residents. And so we're looking to launch a more public version of that in January. That would be somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks. And eventually, we focused so much on the in-person monastic, small scale sort of deep connections, but in the future, we're trying to build more and more online community and sort of like continuing education for people that graduate from being former residents or apprentices or have visited here before or fulfilled this online program. So it might never be just public, but we have a lot of alumni that are hungry to continue training. And so we want to build that connection as well as make it possible for people that can't physically come to one of our centers get exposure to those trainings. And the easiest thing would be send us an email on our website, monasticacademy.com. And when we figure out those cohorts, we'll send out an email and let people know about it.
Right. Sam has a question, and we'll probably end with his question. So Sam, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question to Peter.
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to kind of pull us into the real-time, concrete, logistical even, but I've heard that Oak, the branch of the Monastic Academy that's in the Bay Area in California, is currently looking to potentially purchase a church, I believe, in San Francisco. That there's a lot of excitement about it because it's a large, beautiful facility that could house a lot of apprentices and really accelerate the work as it's being done in this part of the world. And what little I know that there's some kind of real-time constraints on it and everything. I'm curious, like, if you're like how, yeah, if we could just hear a little bit about like where that's at, what their needs are, maybe what kind of help people here might be able to do, if there are tendrils that could go out and help with that endeavor, if possible.
Cool. Yeah, so we have a California branch called Oak. It's in the Bay Area. I believe my understanding is that their current lease that they rent a house is expiring at the end of the year, and they're currently looking at purchasing this historic, beautiful, huge church in downtown San Francisco. That's, I think, like $6 or $7 million is the asking price. And so they're doing a huge fundraising push right now to get donations, grants, loans, and to find a permanent center where they can host dozens, maybe 50 to 100 people or something. So the best thing would be, if you know anyone that wants to support that, whatever form that looks like, maybe they can host a dinner, maybe they can give money, maybe they just spread the word on their social media. Actually, don't know. Do you know what Oak's email address is? Yeah, so oak@monasticacademy.org would be the way to connect with a group out in California. And I think there's a time pressure in that they want to get this done next month. So yeah, that would be really great. And, it'd be a huge boon to San Francisco. They can get a permanent location right in the downtown area. And we're hoping it works out.
Any follow-up questions, Sam?
I guess more just like just to share something. I noticed when I heard about this that it pulled on me in a certain way that I haven't really experienced before, and I think that just might have to do with I think a lot of people who come to the Stoa share the sense that what we call civilization or its structure is maybe decomposing to some extent right now. How fast, it's not clear. To what end, we don't really know. But I'm noticing with this that I'm hoping that the Monastic Academy and maybe some other things will create vortices of navigating that transition and participating in it in a certain way. So I just noticed there's at least in me, a desire to just want to see energy go in that direction.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I think the thing I take the most to heart is that people who even come here for a weekend, I don't think we teach anyone this. I think they're just reminded of it that's already in them, that things like living in community, doing the right thing, living fully and wholly, and being of service are like what we're born to do. And that a lot of the, as you said, systems and culture that have taken over the world over the centuries, decades, centuries, millennia have been pointing in this other really selfish, limited, ignorant sort of perspective. And hopefully we're part of the solution in providing an alternative that doesn't end up more damaging. I honestly, there's a lot of questions. So if anyone ever wants to reach out to us, please feel free to reach out. And, I wish I spoke faster or shorter now. No.
Well, I can send you the chats as well, so you have any questions that didn't go answered. But we're approaching the top of the hour. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with? And maybe a broad question is for the series that's happening at the Stoa on a quarterly rate, is there any way that the Stoa and the Stoa community can help Monastic Academy's goals and ambitions?
Well, these dialogues are really useful and really great. I think the Stoa and our training have a lot of overlap. So it's really, really cool that there's this growing community of people online that are all connecting and be a mutual supportive network, hopefully. I think the biggest thing would be, obviously if you have the financial means, then please donate, but otherwise come visit for a meal, come visit for a weekend, come visit for a program. Once we start up the online programming, please check that out. And I think what's going to save the planet is people that care, getting connected and dedicating themselves to something larger than any one of us. And so it's great to see networks coming together to do this kind of thing. It's great to see people coming out on 12 o'clock Eastern to do something like this. So yeah, please just reach out and continue connecting, and that'll be really great. And go to our website, and there's a lot of links to. Kashin has a wonderful blog where he writes a lot about what we do here. Daniel used to have a podcast that's on indefinite hold right now, but he liked this stuff on his Emerge podcast. And I believe Daniel is also going to be on the STOA. One of the residents here, Daniel's going to be on STOA later today with I forget what time, but one of the other sessions. So if you want to hear from another person, he's going to be on the Joe Brenner.
He's Joe Edelman's Social Design Club, which is a half hour, I think, or yeah, half hour. So if you want to check out Daniel Thornton, you can RSVP on the thestoa.ca. So I'll make some closing announcements in a moment, but Peter, thank you so much for coming to the STOA. I'm looking forward to further collaborations with the Monastic Academy. So for more events, including the one with Daniel Thornton later today, you can go to thestoa.ca. We have a Patreon and a Substack. Later today, we have a really cool event. Because like the Monastic Academy, we're experimenting with an ecology of practice in sort of a digital monastery, or what we're calling the Wisdom Gym. And we're investigating a lot of intersubjective practices and we spaces. And Theodore Ticklis is coming in to do his entangled bodies kind of modality, and the event's called Escaping Narcissism, Experiencing Layers of Listening. It's a really cool technique. I'm in a private practice group, so I'm excited for Teddy to come back, and that's 8:30 p.m. Eastern time if you want to check that out. So that being said, Peter, everyone, thank you for coming to STOA today.